Hello, D1, and welcome back to your personal narrative writing lessons. We are on lesson 13, and we are going to be writing the conclusion paragraph for our personal narrative. So for this job, you will need your narrative notebook, your packet, and a pencil. I'm using a pen, again, just to make sure my writing's dark enough for you guys to read. So again, you're going to need your bucket and a pencil. And so really quickly, I want to go back to make sure that we are using our lesson 4 as a tool to help us with our writing. So I already checked off my beginning, right? So walked through Diagon Alley to get to the ride. I talked about that in the beginning portion of my personal narrative, so it's checked off. Then parts 2 and 3 I was able to combine because they're really similar, and so I checked those off. And then finally I finished off and I talked about how I went on the ride and helped Harry escape. That was also done in my middle portion. And now I have part 5 that I need to write about. And part 5 says, exited the ride and saw the dragon blow fire. So now that is what I'm going to be talking about in my conclusion paragraph of my personal narrative. And so you are going to be looking at your part 5 portion of what happened as your conclusion. And to also help you with that, you are going to look at lesson 10 as well, because in these boxes is where you talked about some of your, you answered some of these questions. So we can help kind of wrap up our story, make sure that a reader has no questions. And so I talked about how Harry needed our help to escape Gringotts, and we were able to help him escape, so we resolved the conflict, and I kind of addressed that in my last paragraph. How did you feel about your experience? I was super grateful for my parents taking me on this trip. And then remember, lessons learned. I didn't really learn anything, or there was no lesson really, moral of the story, so I went ahead and said does not apply. And then finally, what final thoughts do you have about your experience? I was so grateful to my parents and in awe by how accurate everything looked. I felt like I was in the movie. So this is also going to help me when I am drafting my strong ending. So what you're going to do is I want you to quickly just pause the video and I want you to read through your rough draft so far. So Miss Walsh, I already went ahead and I read through my rough draft so far, and I made sure that, again, I checked all this stuff off, and I'm also making sure I know exactly where I need to go next for my writing. So you're going to pause the video and you are going to go ahead and do read through your personal narrative. And once you are back, you finish reading through your personal narrative, I did want to address real quick, I forgot to go back and check. So when I was rereading, I was making sure I was mindful of word choice, which I was. I was really, really descriptive. I was using descriptive adjectives and verbs, and I wasn't saying said over and over again. And then also using sensory details. So I was talking about smell, I was talking about things that I was hearing, I was talking about things I was seeing, so using sensory details as well. So after you've reread your whole rough draft, you should get to a point where now you know exactly where you need to finish up. And so for your rough draft, the end, remember you're on lesson 13 now, when you're finishing up your story, you need to consider the following. How did the experience end? So what happened? And what were your thoughts / feelings? This is going to help us kind of tell our reader exactly how we finished, and it's going to help it wrap it up so that our reader doesn't have questions at the end of our story. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to finish off where I left off. And so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to start with an indent. So if you remember Miss Walsh, where she last left off, she was talking about how she was able to help her and Harry, actually, and the dragon were able to help us escape from Bellatrix unharmed. And so that is where we left off. And so I'm starting a new paragraph, meaning I'm showing a shift in time, a change in time. So I'm going to put an indent. And I'm going to actually start with dialogue because I think that's a really great way to start a paragraph sometimes. So I'm going to say, that was awesome. And I'm going to use an exclamation point because I want my reader to know and feel exactly how it sounded. When I have an exclamation point, that means it's kind of being shouted or said really excitedly. With excitement, rather. That was awesome. My sister cheered as we exited the ride. Walking through the corridor, we saw other tourists as they looked at and purchased their pictures from the ride. And again, you can see here I'm using pretty descriptive language. Instead of just saying we saw people, I'm talking about other tourists. So I'm being really specific about the kind of people I'm seeing. I'm not just seeing anybody. I'm seeing tourists, so people who are coming to the area who don't normally come here. And so I'm being really specific and using that language, and I expect you guys to use it as well. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to continue. Outside the ride, a massive crowd was gathering. So I'm going to make sure you guys can see it. Massive crowd was gathering around the entrance of the ride. Period. So again, now I'm talking about location. I'm being specific. I'm letting my reader know the exact location. So we're outside the ride now. There's a massive crowd, being very specific, using descriptive adjectives. What were they doing? They were gathering, and oops, I added a random letter, so I'm gonna go ahead and scribble that out real quick. Gathering around the entrance of the ride. And so again, I'm using really descriptive language, using a descriptive verb to describe what is happening. What are they looking at? I wondered. And so you can see with my dialogue, I remember to add quotation marks. That is so, so, so important. If you do not have quotation marks, I do not know that it is dialogue, and that is an important piece of your personal narratives. So I went ahead, I added my quotation marks. What are they looking at? I added my comma, quotation marks. I wondered. And again, I didn't say I said, right? Said, that is one of our no-no words. It is boring and we don't want to use it too frequently. So I wondered. Not even a second later. So here I'm kind of creating suspense, making it dramatic. We love drama. Not even a second later, the giant dragon that was sitting on top of Gringotts. Make sure I move it up. Let out an explosive roar. And flames came shooting out of its mouth. And so again, I'm showing the noise that I'm hearing, and that counts as a piece of dialogue. So I went ahead, I put a comma before I started my dialogue because it's in the middle of a sentence. I added my quotation marks, the sound that was made, exclamation point, I added another comma, quotation marks. And because it's in the middle of the sentence, I made sure I added those commas because that is very, very important. And I'm going to continue on because I did not let my readers know how I'm feeling right now. So I need to make sure that I add that as well. So I'm talking about the dragon, which was really important. I made sure I mentioned that in my brainstorm so I can check that off. But now I need to let my reader know what I'm experiencing, what I'm feeling. So I'm going to continue. As I stood, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next page. As I stood, under the dragon, comma, feeling the warmth from the fire above, I thought to myself, making sure I put a comma now because I'm going to share my thoughts, which is part of our dialogue. I am so grateful that Mom and Dad took us on this trip. And so what's really cool about this sentence is that not only did I share how I was feeling, I'm so grateful that Mom and Dad took us on the trip, but I also added sensory details in here. So I added that feeling, the warmth from the fire above. So you can imagine what I'm feeling, that warm feeling when you're around a fire, maybe a campfire. So I'm letting my reader again kind of sense exactly what I'm feeling, so they can almost picture themselves in my shoes. And so now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to go back to my first page, and I'm going to make sure that I met this criteria. How did this experience end? I can check that off because I talked about how I got off the ride, how then I saw the dragon blowing fire, and how I'm just feeling really grateful. And then again, I'm sharing my thoughts and feelings, talking about how I was feeling, again, really grateful for my parents taking me on this trip. And so that is going to be it for your lesson 13. Remember, this is a model that Miss Walsh is showing you. And so you are going to now take what Miss Walsh did with her writing, and you're going to use this as an example for what you are going to talk about for the end of your personal narrative. So remember, you were talking about your family vacation, what you did on your family vacation, and you are going to write your final paragraph and help wrap it all up and let your reader leave with no questions. And so that is going to be it for today's job. If you have any questions, please message me so I can help support you guys. And that's going to be it. All right, bye, D1.